I'm Bob Ritter, and for the DLS committee, I want to welcome you to the third lecture in our season series. So, global warming. What does that mean? Is it real or is it a hoax? Do humans cause it or not? Is it really an existential threat to humankind? And where is the evidence? Is it adequate? Is it contradictory? Is there any consensus? Can it be stopped? What happens to us if we don't? Why should I care? These questions abound, and they are certainly very good ones. We all have them. With his 35 years of scientific study and his award-winning photography documenting Earth's dramatic recent changes, our distinguished speaker will share with us the answers. To open, here's a brief trailer from his upcoming movie.
The new ideas that I'm exploring today really started back in about 1980.
We are directly over Mount St. Helens right now, and there is no question at all that the volcanic activity has begun.
I was an entry-level photographer, and it was one of my first assignments. To see the scale and intensity of the destruction of the landscape was mind-boggling. I've come to think of all of these natural powers churning around as natural tectonics. But there's a parallel force on this planet that I've come to think of as human tectonics. Seas continue to rise, forests continue to live, die, burn, change. All around us here in the latitudes where so many of us live, we can see climate change in action here in our backyard.
We're being asked to battle fires that didn't exist 20 years ago.
Fuel loads increased over time, weather and climatology that has gone to extremes.
We're trying to understand these incredible changes that are around us right here, right now. And the common pattern is climate.
We created an ecological insurgency with our fire program. And sending in crews and air tankers isn't going to put it down.
Our guys were gone. They weren't resources really anymore to me. They were, people. And so we're going to tell these people, tell that guy, you know what? You got a family, and it doesn't matter right now. You took an oath, go in there.
If you can blame a flood or a fire or a hurricane on an act of God, collectively everybody's responsible, but individually no one is.
There's a big environmental change happening right under our noses. It's all around us right now, even as I sit here.
So you're watching the record book of time that came out of the ice, and you're seeing the story of it unfold right there in front of you. Fantastic.
We have that opportunity to reveal the truth and reveal history to people, the ongoing history that we're all living within.
The climate has changed. It turns out you can't go back. In a certain philosophical sense, that locks you into an ironic narrative. But I don't want the story to end with that.
The ancient Greeks had this idea that the essential elements of existence were earth, air, fire, and water. But what I learned is that the Greeks missed one incredibly important thing, and that's life itself. There's this great energy and desire to live and to survive. And an essential part of that life force is, of course, humanity.
Life is an experiment. We know if something's right, or correct, or true, by being tested. Science can inform, history can inform, but ultimately I think climate change is very much a part of our cultural landscape.
And I think we've got a chance to bring the story of these changing landscapes alive.
Please welcome from Boulder, Colorado, Jim Balog.
Thank you. Away we go. Hello, hello. Good evening. So nice to see you here. Thank you. This is a fabulous theater, a fabulous lecture series. And Franny and the committee do an amazing job at keeping this whole operation on track. And I have to tell you, I've been in a lot of theaters and dealt with a lot of electronics technicians and projectors and audio, and this is one of the best operations I've ever seen. So I'm very pleased to be here. Because some of the language may not necessarily be, sorry, I just lost my headset. Some of the language that you heard in that last piece may not be normal vocabulary. I just wanted to reiterate this up on the screen. So natural tectonics are the forces of nature, whether it's hurricanes and storms or earthquakes or volcanoes, natural tectonics. And human tectonics are what we, the people, bring to the system around us. This is my own coinage. I've thought about this for a long, long time. And human tectonics denote the following forces. It's the combined impact of our human population, coupled with our survival needs, multiplied by our needs or desire for affluence, multiplied by our technology, connected with our systems of money and power and how that flows around the world and reshapes the world, and then finally how our ideas and policy choices shape the world. All of that together is human tectonics. And we are basically a great colony of 7 billion plus people who reshape the world around us. I wouldn't say we're an equivalent force of power necessarily to earthquakes and volcanoes, but we sure are a corollary. And the living world, and the world of atmosphere, and the world of water is affected by what we all do. Now, another point of semantics I want to get clear on before we move forward is this. A lot of people ask me if I believe in climate change, and the answer is, in fact, no. I'll often be on airplanes, and I'm sitting there going through a stack of science papers, and the guy next to me will say, "Oh, what are you reading?" And I tell him, "Oh, this is a study of Antarctica climate change or Greenland climate change or oceans or whatever," and he says, that guy, he's sort of a general guy, and I've seen him about 50 times. He wrinkles up his brow and he says, "You don't believe in climate change, do you?" And my answer is no, I don't believe in climate change. I think that climate change is real based on the evidence that I have experienced and that thousands of smart women and men have been accumulating for 200 years. This whole story about how carbon reshapes the atmosphere and the behavior of weather and the accumulation of weather events known as climate, that story's been around for over 200 years. Scientists in Germany, France, Britain, Sweden, and the United States have understood this since the 19th century. And we're still arguing about it in some sectors. So this has been here. It's based on the chemical and physical evidence. We can't legislate it away. We can't lobby it away. We can't propagandize it away. We can't wish it away. This is how the chemistry and physics of the world work. If you add carbon to the air supply, it retains heat. It acts as a blanket that holds the heat in against the Earth's surface. That's evidence. That's tangible. That's real. Now, belief, and this is why I don't like the word belief in connection with climate change. Belief is about ideology and dogma and doctrine. That's something that you accept with your intuition because of some wiring that you have, some mental means you need to have of adapting to the world. Those are belief systems. That has nothing to do with empirical physical reality as we experience it today on this planet. Now, I accept the importance of belief. Belief is incredibly important for certain kinds of things. For example, I have no idea why we live on a little rock swirling around out in the middle of the Milky Way. I have no idea why I exist on this planet, and I have no idea where I'm going to after I die. Belief helps with comprehending these great intangible metaphysical things. But that's not what climate change is. That's not what the ongoing environmental changes are. So evidence, we're dealing with evidence here. Now, we're also dealing with tangible physical reality. There's a pernicious thing going on in our society today where people are saying things like, there's no such thing as science. There's no such thing as facts. And I beg to differ. Science is the accumulation of knowledge that the human race has compiled for many hundreds of years. It goes back before the European Enlightenment. The great Arab scientists of the Middle Ages had tremendous insights. Some of the Chinese scientists before that had tremendous insights. But most importantly, our scientific structure of today is based on what's happened for the past 500 years in the West. And we've understood a lot of things by observing objective reality. So let me give you a very, really elementary example, okay, that kids learn in grade school. So what happens when I throw this ball up in the air? It falls to the ground, right? Why did it fall to the ground? Gravity, right. There's a force called gravity. You can't see it, touch it, smell it, feel it, whatever. But science has studied this and understands that it exists. That's what holds us down to the surface of the earth. Should I throw this out to you, Dad? Here. Secondly, about tangible physical reality. Here's a bucket full of ice. And what happens when you hold this in your hands? What happens to the ice? It melts, right. We all understand that. We learned that when we were about 1 year old. And it melts because there is a transfer of heat from a warm surface to the cold surface, and it makes the ice change state, okay? It's basic. That's fundamental science. And these kinds of things are real. Finally, in our current time, there's this question of semantics, where there are certain strange forces in our political system that are trying to convince us that black is white and white is black, and the sun rises in the west and not the east, and it's all kinds of crazy, muddled nonsense that we're getting fed right now. And so I want to see if we can agree on some basic semantics. So we'll spin this little slot machine and see if we can agree. Well, we all hold this common language called English. So what's that globular cluster over on the left side of the screen? What are those things called? Grapes. Okay, we all agree on that. What's the color? Purple. In the center, orange, with a color that's known as orange. On the right, strawberry with a color that's known as red. So there is actually a reality that we agree upon, and we need to stay focused on that in these times especially. There's a fact-based science that knows something about the world. There's a language that we've agreed upon for a very, very long time that describes that world. And I can't emphasize that enough. And it permeates our daily lives right now, this issue of agreed upon reality versus voodoo and witchcraft. So, similarly, there's this invisible, intangible substance called air. It exists in this space between me and all the rest of you. And between each one of you, there's a material thing full of molecules called air. And it has a certain chemical constituency that behaves in a certain way that's been very, very well understood for 150 years plus. That when you have a certain amount of carbon dioxide and methane and nitrous oxide in that air, it's going to hold the heat in a certain way. And it's also been understood that if you change that chemical composition, it's going to hold the heat in a different way. So there's air. And so as the chemistry changes, you wind up retaining heat in a different way. And as you retain heat in a different way, for the purposes of this narrative tonight, two big things happen. One is that you dry out forests and grass, and they catch fire more easily. And the second one is that ice melts. And those are the two branches of this story that we're going to go down. So first, the fire story. What we've seen since the mid-'80s is that we're having many, many, many more fires. The fires are bigger and the fire season lasts longer. We have about 10.5 million acres additionally that have been burned because of human-caused climate change affecting the fire regimes, particularly in the American West and up through Canada. Actually, this number is for only the 50 United States. Canada is a whole separate number. For some reason down here south of the border, we're very jingoistic and we only focus on our American problems, but there is a big country called Canada up north of that 48th parallel. This is what it looks like out there. I've been shooting wildfires for the past 3 summers, and it's incredible what goes on. A lot of people ask me, what's the scariest place you've been? What's the scariest thing you've done? And there's some pretty gnarly things that have happened to us on the Greenland ice sheet, and some of it's represented in our film, Chasing Ice. But I'll tell you, it's nothing compared to these fires. These fires are so scary, so powerful, so vicious, and so uncomfortable to be around. That heat. Sometimes I felt like my skin was literally going to crack and burn right off my face. It was so hot. And these folks who work in this environment, as these trees are literally vaporizing and exploding into flames, are real heroes for me. This is tough, tough work. They're inhaling vast amounts of carbon particulates. They're inhaling benzene, formaldehyde. I had no idea until I worked on this project that when you burn trees, you convert a lot of the whatever the chemicals are that are in trees, you wind up with a lot of formaldehyde and benzene in the air. So you're walking around in that smoke, and you're aware that the carbon dioxide is making you goofy in the head, but you're also inhaling benzene and formaldehyde. Not a pretty thing to contemplate. These guys work amazingly hard. It's a 19-year-old woman in the middle whose favorite activity is lifting weights so she can keep up with the guys in her battalion. And of course, when fires happen, houses burn. This is a fire that nearly burned my house in the foothills of the Rockies in, I think it was 2010. And you can see in the bottom of the frame, there's a little kind of a waterfall going down the steps. And this is what that waterfall looks like. And it was apparently an aluminum lawn chair that melted, and the metal one flowing down the steps. Of course, vehicles get burned. And that's what's left of a Jeep, and that's what's left of a BMW motorcycle. So you dry out the fuels in the natural landscape, you add heated air to that, you add people and the various ways that we can ignite the landscape, and you add extra lightning. We get a lot more lightning these days, a lot of dry lightning that comes in storms that don't carry any moisture. So you add all these pieces together, excuse me, and you get fires. This is what it looks like. This is some clips from the fire section of the film to give you a bit more of a taste of the action. And it's a weird combination of beauty meeting awe and horror. And that's kind of at the root of a lot of what I've done for many, many years. It's trying to find the beauty in these awe-inspiring and yet at some level horrific at some level horrific activity, but it all matters. You've got to somehow embrace those things together. As George's daughter, Jenny Jordan, is always telling me, it's my job as an artist to embrace the beauty and the contradiction of the horror at the same time. So here goes with the fire. I said, insanely beautiful and insanely overwhelming, kind of all at the same time. So what's happening? Here's the story of how air temperatures on average around the world are changing. And in many regions, there's multiples of this kind of change going on. But this is the global condition right here. We've had a warming of nearly 2 degrees Fahrenheit over the past 180 years. And it's continuing to go up. This is the picture of the last 400,000 years, and these temperatures are understood from ice cores that are pulled up from within the ice sheets of Greenland and Antarctica. And what happens is that in ancient snowstorms, the snow falls, it piles up, and it traps air molecules in the ice that forms. Let me back up a little bit. The snow piles up, it compresses into ice. When it compresses into ice, it traps little air bubbles that are representative of the air temperatures during that time. And scientists can go and drill holes down through, like the Antarctic ice sheet, pull up these cores that in some cases are 2 miles long. A friend of mine calls it a time machine. You pull up this 2-mile-long time machine from inside Antarctica, and they sit there and they slice and dice these little layers of the ice sheet, check out the air bubbles, and with very, very refined chemical measurements, they can tell how cold it was 150,000 years ago, 152,000 years ago, whatever, all the way back for nearly 1 million years. This graph is basically representing the story of the 400,000 years behind us, but the rhythm looks the same. The blue line is the carbon dioxide, the primary greenhouse gas, and that fluctuates between 180 parts per million and 280 on the natural peak of it in response to the way that the Earth moves around the sun. We don't maintain the same orbit all the time. It changes. And as it changes in this rhythmic oscillation, you can see a peak, then a low point, a peak, a low point, a peak, a low point. As it changes, the plants on the Earth change, and that affects the way the CO2 record shows up. But the key point is, number one, the nature, if left to its own devices, naturally peaks out at 280 parts per million of CO2, the primary greenhouse gas. And right now, 2017, we're at 406 parts per million. That's not a computer model, that's not a projection, that's measured every second at the Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii. I've been out there, spent 3 days there, watched what these guys do, amazing science, very careful analysis. It's been going on since 1958. The other thing that's key is this. You see up here in the top right corner, okay, so the CO2 is going up and down and up and down. And we are coming out of a glacial age that was called the Pleistocene, and it ended roughly, depending on where you were, about 12,000 years ago. We should be, according to the natural rhythm, slowly sliding into another ice age, but we're not, because of the additional gases that we've dumped into the atmosphere from burning coal, oil, and natural gas. And by cutting down large expanses of forest, we're not holding as much carbon in the ground anymore. So we are in the process of watching sea level go up, temperatures go up as the gases in the atmosphere change. We're adding roughly 2.5 to 3 parts per million per year right now. So as I see it, we're taking a huge gamble with the climate. We're playing dice with the world as we know it. We have 97% of the scientists who are specialists in this field think, not believe, they think, based on the evidence, that climate change is happening and it's influenced by our species, Homo sapiens. Now, imagine if you had a problem with your lungs and you went and you got an x-ray, and the x-ray, the radiologist came back and the radiologist said, you know, I think you've got a tumor in there, I think you better go see a pulmonary specialist. The pulmonary specialist says to you, better take out the tumor. Would you go seeing 97 different specialists who told you to take out the tumor until you found the one pulmonary specialist who said, you know, don't worry about it. It's okay. You can leave that tumor in. That's what we're doing by dragging our feet and dealing with climate change. Now, there's a lot of good things happening all around the world right now, but there's also a lot of resistance. And frankly, we're being stupid. Science has been an incredibly powerful force in our world. It's created the lights that are shining in this room right now. Science has created the medical technology that's allowed so many of us to live to advanced ages. It's created the opportunity for me to be on an airplane and come here, and so forth and so on. Science is real. Manifested in engineering. It's integral to our lives. And so to try and kind of wish all this stuff away, this 97% agreement, is madness. We got the best people in the world agreeing with a 97% probability. You can't go anywhere in the human race and get 97% of people to agree on anything. 97% is an amazing majority, and we need to act on it. So let's go back to the narrative here now. So remember, we already looked at burning forests. Now we're going down the track with melting ice. I've been climbing on mountains and glaciers and doing recreational mountaineering as well as photography for pretty much my entire adult life. These are fabulous places. I love them dearly, amazing experiences. But this project, the Extreme Ice Survey, came out of a story that I shot for National Geographic in 2006 and became a cover story. There have been a couple more stories in the magazine, and we also produced a film for National Geographic TV that wound up on PBS Nova. Now glaciers, back to the glacier story. So snow falls in the winter, and if more snow falls in winter than gets a chance to melt away in the summer, the snow piles up. And as it piles up, it squeezes out the air and the snow turns into ice. When it turns into ice, if there's any slope at all in the landscape, it slowly starts drifting downhill. That's what a glacier is. And these glaciers, I think of them with a little poetic license as being alive. They're responding to the touch of the air and the water around them. They are dynamic creatures in dynamic interaction with their worlds. Learning in the course of that National Geographic cover story that there was so much change going on, I decided that I should build time-lapse cameras and let them stay out there when I was here in civilization doing other work, like talking to you guys. So I invented this system for putting Nikon cameras inside these Pelican housings that were modified with, figured out a way to modify them with a certain kind of glass on the front, put them on supports, bolted them to bedrock, took solar panels, put power into batteries, and then with this little custom-made computer timer, told the cameras when to fire. The cameras shoot every half hour of daylight, as long as it's daylight, in all these different locations marked in white. I just came back from Antarctica 2 weeks ago, checking up on 9 cameras down there. Fantastic places I get to go, but it's hard work. It takes a long time. Donor supported. I'll put in a pitch for that. This isn't money that just rains out of the sky from universities or NASA or National Science Foundation. We've got to raise almost all this money to keep this system alive. And it's 90% of it is from individual donors who believe in the work. So if any of you are so inclined, we'd love to hear from you. Here's what one of the systems looks like. This is a little mountain up here called Mount Everest. And here's a camera bolted to a cliff at 19,500 feet, looking down on the Khumbu Glacier. The Everest Base Camp on the south side route is right here. And that was up there for a couple years. I wish I could show this trailer, but we're tight on time, so we've elected to pull it out of the show. But I encourage you, if you have any interest in the subject at all, and you have a subscription to Netflix when you go home, take a look at Netflix, pull up Chasing Ice, and you can see this film. This is the story of what we did between 2007 and 2012 when the film came out, and what the field work is like, and what all the trials and tribulations are. And it's pretty wild. There are sections in there that my mother literally will cover her eyes on and refuses to watch. So here's what one of the time-lapse cameras saw. This is at Mendenhall Glacier in southeast Alaska near Juneau. Watch this, 2007 and forward. The camera preserves this memory. It's amazing. It's a magical tool for remembering what was there. Without the camera, you would forget what there had been. That will probably go in around the corner in the next 2 summers or so, and we won't see it anymore. So we turn time backwards, put Humpty Dumpty back together. That's where it started in 2007. And this is what became of it by last summer. I'll show you a couple repeat pairs so that I won't do the time lapse on this, I'll just show before and after comparisons. A glacier in Iceland, 2007. Same glacier, same place, 9 years later. I never imagined I'd be watching rivers and lakes forming in the course of this project. Mind-blowing. Glacier in Switzerland. I'll go back this summer and repeat this, and I guarantee you that this patch of ice is gone by now. Now up to Greenland, which is by far and away the biggest ice sheet and glacier in the northern hemisphere, basically a small continent covered with ice. And 80% of it is ice, and these big ice streams come out where it's blue and purple and go dumping into the ocean in these fjords. The single most important site is called the Ilulissat Glacier right here. And we have spent a great deal of time photographing that area. Greenland has warmed up tremendously. The Arctic Ocean basin, basically north of about 60 degrees and all the way up to the North Pole, that's warmed at, on average, the whole place has warmed up about 4 or 5 degrees Fahrenheit in the past 20 years because of a phenomenon called Arctic amplification. Without getting into it too deeply, the more the polar ice cap melts, the more heat that gets absorbed in the Arctic Ocean, and the warmer the whole area up there gets. It's a feedback loop that keeps it getting warmer and warmer, and that in turn affects the jet stream and the air movement that affects our weather down in these latitudes all the way to Florida. But in any event, we have had as many as 5 cameras working at this location, and we've generally had to keep repositioning them to look further and further inland. And then the glaciers were receding so far, we wound up setting up different sites to follow the glacier termini as they went deeper and deeper into the interior of the country. This next clip is this huge, what's called a calving event. It's a break-off of icebergs that came from the glacier terminus over the course of 75 minutes in the summer of 2008. This clip is in the Guinness Book of World Records as being the largest calving event ever recorded. I bet we don't have many competitors for that, but I'm happy to take that little kudo while we're at it. So here goes. These bergs, by the way, are 300 to 600 feet above the water line and about 2,000 or 2,500 feet below water line. This all happens in 75 minutes, an hour and a quarter. This berg right here, you could lay 2 Empire State Buildings on their sides, and it would be about the height of that berg. Now I'll do what no self-respecting photographer would ever do to his beautiful pictures, and I'll put some goofy illustrations on top of them to show exactly how big this was, because it's a huge place and it's really hard to grasp it. But the block of ice that broke off was 1 mile by 3 miles. and it was comparable to the width of 2 Golden Gate bridges. But the analogy they really love in Washington is how many US Capitol buildings would have fit in that block of ice. I get a big chuckle out of this in Congress, at regulatory agencies. Everybody loves this analogy. And the answer is 3,000 US Capitol buildings would fit in that. And that's a big building. Many of us have been there on the Washington Mall. You know it's big. So for the sake of current news, I wanted to throw this in. I haven't been to the Larsen C ice shelf, but I've been just on the other side of the peninsula from it. And you've been hearing a lot about this on TV, on the radio stations, and the newspapers, because there's an ice shelf up here in the process of breaking off. But here's the South Pole. Here's Antarctica. The Antarctic Peninsula is right here, and we're looking into a magnification of this area. This whole peninsula area has had all of these ice shelves in orange breaking off over the past 25 years from warming of the area. Annually, this area is warmed up year-round 5 degrees Fahrenheit. In the wintertime, at Palmer Station right here, this is an American research base, it's warmed up 11 degrees on average in winter in the past 50 years. And Larsen C, that you've heard so much about, is this embayment of ice right here. Larsen A broke up in the early 1990s. This broke up in 2002, Larsen B. And Larsen C is where this big crack is that's peeling off right here. It seems to portend the possibility that more big shelves will break off. When they do, it uncorks the mountain glaciers that are pouring down from the spine of the peninsula, and a lot more ice will dump into the ocean. That's a process we'll probably see unfold over these next years. That's what it looks like. NASA and the British Antarctic Survey flew a plane over this. Here's the chunk that's breaking off and going out to sea to the east, and this is still the intact ice. So, as these pieces break off, these huge icebergs get smaller and smaller and smaller, and each one of those transformed pieces of ice turns into global sea level. It's not an abstraction for the Arctic or Antarctic. It's an immediate reality for this coastline right here in Florida, right off the shores of Vero Beach. Block by block, this is my 10-year-old daughter Emily in Iceland, holding a little last chunk of a 1,000-year-old piece of glacier. And I often wonder when I look at that picture, is Emily looking at the future reproachfully, or is she looking at her father reproachfully for making her hold that ice? Anyway, take it either way you want. So this collapse of the ice masses has concrete real-world reality. Concrete real-world reality. That made no sense. This has a concrete manifestation along the coastlines of the entire world. On average, sea level is going up 1/8 of an inch per year around the world. Some landscapes are seeing a lot more than that. Virginia is seeing close to twice that. Some places are seeing a little bit less than that. But on average, 1/8 of an inch per year. And what that means, it's, you say to yourself, well, okay, all right, so what? In 8 years, you get 1 inch of sea level rise, supposedly. Oh, doesn't seem like very much. But it doesn't take very many eighths in inches before you have a big lateral movement of the border of the sea. And I didn't appreciate that until I was working in Norfolk, Virginia, and at Hurricane Matthew when it came whipping up the coast in October. So the big issue is that when you have a hurricane or you have a nor'easter, this sea level rise, even if it's a small increment, it adds a battering ram to the storm surge as it comes in. Very dangerous stuff. Water is powerful. Boy, I've had a lot of encounters with water in the course of my life, in rivers and oceans and whatever. Water is an astoundingly powerful material. And I hate to tell you, but this is the flood map for Vero Beach. And this is if you get 4 feet of sea level rise. Here's the lower bridge down by the power plant. Here's the upper one. What's this called? Baxter Bridge, I think. What's it called? Yeah, okay. So the blue is the inundation area with 4 feet. Not so much. That's 8 feet. It doesn't take the world's biggest hurricane to create 8 feet of flooding. What I learned also from working at Hurricane Matthew in October is that storm flooding isn't just about the storm surge and the storm hitting on the high tide. There's a combination of what the seas are doing with how much rain is coming out of the air. So if you get these huge downpours during a hurricane and the seas have come up just a little bit, a foot or 2 or 3, you have no place for all that storm water to drain off, and you just get drowned from within. You get drowned from the sky in a big storm just as much as you get drowned from sea level. So these two things are in some kind of dynamic equilibrium. This is what it looked like in Charleston. The waters were already starting to go down a little bit, but they had about 4 feet of inundation. And I can tell you that the comparable sea level rise map to what I just showed you for Vero, I had it for Charleston, and it is absolutely accurate to within about a quarter of a block, because I was standing in that water, and it described the conditions extremely well. This is the night after the hurricane. And the thing I'm really struck by is this. We used to think in terms of a lot of these climate change issues as being something for 50 or 100 years out. And what we've learned over the past 10 years is that a lot of the most serious impacts are happening right now. And already the coastline of Miami is feeling the effects of the sea level rise. Louisiana's feeling the sea level rise. Norfolk, Virginia is feeling the sea level rise. On average high tides, parts of Norfolk flood every single day from the tide coming in. In the fall, especially, October, November, December, January. And this is not something where you can say, well, we don't need to think about it too much right now. Our grandkids or great-grandkids or somebody else, not us, will have to deal with this. No. In fact, the reality is that in the lifetimes of the kids who are alive today, they're going to be dealing with a sea level and a coastline that's radically different than the sea level and coastline we know of right now. So I did a series of pictures with some children in Virginia to try and evoke that. This girl is 6 years old, and in her lifetime, that water is going to come up as much, at least, as the distance is right now between her feet and her eye line. It'll come up that far. One of the other tragic ironies of this whole thing is that what we're doing here in the developed world has a huge impact on the developing world. And folks in Indonesia and South America and Asia have less of an ability to pay for and respond to the results of what we do. So this is a lot of policy talk, and it kind of grieves me in a way that I have to do this sometimes, but it's important to tell these big picture stories in words. But I would like to get back right now to the beauty of the ice and do a love letter for the ice. This is a piece, a melody that was composed by the great film composer Ennio Morricone, words by Sarah Brightman, and sung by Sarah Brightman with pictures by me. And then I'll come back after this, and we can talk a little bit about a couple of thoughts before we do Q&A. a pretty good voice. All right, so where does that leave us? What I take away from all of these years, 37 years now of chasing this intersection of people and nature, is that we're not separate from nature. We have two gigantic cultural traditions that tell us we are. I don't believe them to be true. And that's why I coined that phrase, human tectonics. Number one, the basic utilitarian view of nature that we have taken for many thousands, if not millions of years, is that nature is a breadbasket that sits outside us and we can just take what we want from it and everything will be okay. The other big tradition is the modern environmental tradition, which is grounded in 19th century European Romanticism, which in turn is grounded all the way back in Roman and Greek poetry of a very long time ago. But basically that tradition says that nature is also outside of us, and it's a place we need to return to in order to be pure and holy and satisfied. But what I've learned is that while they're both true in their own ways, they're incomplete, they're insufficient, because nature is all around us. We are part of nature, and nature is part of us. And so everything we do in the course of damaging or destroying or altering nature, we're in some fashion, direct or indirect, elliptical or overt, we are altering the terms of engagement with ourselves and with the world around us. So we are in and of nature. For that reason, science has coined this new term for our epoch of geologic time, the Anthropocene. This is a new idea that just came down 16 years ago, the Anthropocene. People are integral to the natural system. We are in and of it. Which leaves us with a choice. I believe that climate change is not a problem of technology, policy, and economics. We know what the solutions are in those dimensions. There are thousands and thousands of pages and tens of thousands of smart people who have worked on this issue. We know what the blueprints are, we know what the maps are, we know how to deal with this. What we have is a problem of ethics and morality. We have to ask ourselves, who are we? Are we people who are selfish and short-term? Or are we generous and we think long-term? Are we cynical and negative and want to avoid these problems? Or are we going to be optimistic and constructive? And we have to acknowledge the fact that there might be adversity along the way. Not everything is always entertaining and easily done. Nothing that has ever been of any real consequence has been easy to do. We have to put our shoulders to the wheel and find the solutions. That's what Homo sapiens has always done when faced with the great challenges. So that's the choice. What kind of people are we? And it seems to me that the heart of that choice is having respect for ourselves, for the other people around us, including our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And it's also a question of respect for the home that we live in, this place called planet Earth. And so if you add up all of that respect and all of that attention and concern, I believe that that the issue of climate change comes down to one word. And the word is whether we have enough of this in our hearts in order to address this issue properly. I believe that we do, and I think that word is love. And that's what we have to act upon. Thank you.